A clear sound resonated as he flicked the blade with his finger. When held up to the light, a subtle blue hue reflected. It must have been made of a unique metal.
It doesn't seem to be Valyrian steel.
This was the sword he had taken after killing Mitch Hurrier. It was obviously a high-quality, expensive sword. How could he just leave it behind, anyway? Would Chryse know? Enkrid turned his head to the side. There, sitting 3 steps away, was Chryse, staring at him intently. With those big eyes, Chryse looked at him with a curious expression. Enkrid opened up and asked, "What?" Before asking about the metal of the sword, he felt he needed to address that strange look.
It's fascinating.
What is?
Your left hand.
As he spoke, Chryse glanced at Enkrid's left hand. Was he always this good with his left hand? It didn't seem so, considering they hadn't been together for just a day or two. The left hand was quite impressive. Is this what they call a genius? Chryse himself didn't have any talent for swordsmanship or martial arts, so he couldn't tell just by looking.
Wasn't he ordinary before?
Aside from his actions, his skills seemed to have been ordinary. When Enkrid saved him, risking half his life to protect another, Chryse had thought, what kind of person does that?
Risking your life to protect someone else, that's not something that makes sense.
Just because they were in the same squad, did that mean he had to save him? It was less than a week since they had first met. There was a big difference between his skills then and now. The enemy commander who ambushed them was clearly no ordinary person. And Enkrid had parried the sword of such a formidable opponent with just his left hand.
I've been training consistently.
Enkrid answered nonchalantly. Chryse nodded and asked again.
So, did you kill the ambushing commander?
Was it his left hand? Or what kind of battle was it? Intensity? Thrill? It was a situation filled with such emotions. If things had gone wrong, the platoon leader would have died. Had that happened, they would have crossed the river of death hand in hand with Vengeance or whatever his name was, and Esther. But in that intense situation, the platoon leader remained calm. He faced the approaching enemy as if it was a natural opponent.
It was a chaotic battle.
Again, Enkrid's answer was nonchalant. Chryse concluded, a late-blooming genius. His talent must have blossomed late. There was no reason or need to delve deeper. Aside from his curiosity, it was obvious there wouldn't be any answers. Even if he tried to doubt him, there was nothing to go on. Is there some grand secret? There's nothing here that would suggest that, unless the platoon leader could foresee the future and knew everything that was going to happen at that moment.
But that's just ridiculous.
No prophet or fortune-teller could predict a situation with such meticulous detail. Moreover, Chryse believed that most of these fortune-tellers were just scam artists desperate to make a quick buck.
The world runs on Krona.
It rises and falls with Krona. Why are Nerilia and Aspen fighting? In his view, there was only one reason. The Green Pearl Plains, whichever kingdom controls it, essentially gains a second granary.
Even I'd jump at the chance to take it.
Therefore, the war between the two nations was inevitable. In an era of war and struggle, taking up swords and spears for profit was all too natural. So, Enkrid's genius, which wouldn't contribute to Krona, could be ignored here.
What kind of metal do you think this is?
Enkrid asked, holding out the sword the enemy commander had wielded. He had brought it along amidst everything.
It's good metal. Do you think I asked just to hear that kind of answer?
Of course not. There was no need to ponder.
There's a famous iron ore deposit in the kingdom of Aspen called Demp.
Demp? Demp. I've heard of it. Isn't that the hidden village between the river and the mountains?
Muttering to himself, Enkrid nodded. He had wandered the continent for quite some time. Chryse nodded and responded.
Yes, they say the iron from Demp shows this kind of peculiar hue. It starts with like a blue tint, gets deeper, and the best quality iron shows no color at all.
This was just what he had heard, but one thing was certain. A sword made from Demp iron would be more expensive than Valyrian steel, probably pricier than Noir Mountain iron as well. So this was quite an exceedingly very expensive sword.
If you sell that...
I'm not selling it.
Huh? Are you gonna switch swords?
For those who venture into battle, there's nothing more important than a weapon they're familiar with. This is common knowledge, something Chryse was also aware of. So it was unlikely that the platoon leader would switch from a sword he was accustomed to.
What if I used both?
This wasn't directed at Chryse. It was something Enkrid muttered to himself. A spring breeze, mixed with warmth instead of chill, rustled Enkrid's hair. Through the strands of hair, Enkrid's gaze rested on the sword. Christ saw the look in the platoon leader's eyes. A peculiar expression, he thought. How to describe it? Eyes that shone brightly, full of life and vigor, like those of a boy receiving an unexpected gift. Seeing that look, Christ couldn't bring himself to push Enkrid to sell the sword any further. The platoon leader, Enkrid's blue eyes, reminiscent of a lake, were gleaming with excitement, much like Esther's. Enkrid didn't care whether Christ was watching him or not. The reason he had become proficient with his left hand. He didn't need a grand excuse. In fact, there was no excuse to be made. It's not something that could be easily explained. All he could say was, "I've been training all this time." It might sound like he was becoming some sort of genius. But there was no other way. More importantly, Enkrid felt something akin to talent this time. A sense of rapid advancement, an experience where his skills improved dramatically, like grasping what would usually take 100 swings in just a few.
It's intriguing, but
Would that happen again? He didn't know. He didn't need to know. He just had to keep doing what he was doing. He could continue walking his path steadily. For Enkrid, talent was never the main focus.
when my body recovers,
He could try various things. Sitting on a makeshift seat, a rock in front of the infirmary at the rear, Enkrid immersed himself in reflection. Training, left hand, right hand, chaotic battle, Mitch Hurrier, his sword, the fight, the battlefield. As he thought deeply, he wanted to get up and move.
They told you not to strain yourself. Why do you think I'm watching over you here?
Christ said offhandedly beside him. Yes, he was right. He was told to rest completely for at least a few days. This was the medic's instruction after seeing his injuries. The rear camp was handled by the supply unit, while the 2nd Company 3rd Platoon, Vengeance's platoon, stayed behind for defense, awaiting reinforcements. Once reinforcements arrived, Enkrid planned to head to the front lines. For that, his body needed to heal. His right hand was still in a splint. His shoulder had a shallow cut. There was a puncture wound on his left forearm from a dagger. Though not major injuries individually, they were wounds that could worsen with too much movement.
well, this is just great.
His body ached in various places due to attempting a strenuous joint lock. Had he not trained in the isolation technique? Had he not focused on a single point? Had the heart of the beast not supported him? Had he not sensed the blade's presence?
I would have been the one to die.
Enkrid sat idly, focusing on recovery. All the while he mentally practiced sword swings, at first with just his right hand, then holding one sword with both hands. At the end of his mental training, Enkrid held his sword in his right hand and Mitch Hurrier's sword in his left.
Can I do this?
He didn't know. He just wanted to try. It felt right in his hands, dual-wielding.
First, I'll need more strength.
Before attempting dual-wielding, he needed to focus on strengthening himself. Wielding 2 swords with one in each hand is a completely different challenge compared to using just one. One of his instructors had criticized this approach.
Dual swords, it's just a great way to get yourself killed. If you can't handle one sword properly, trying to use 2 is foolish. Even skilled swordsmen rarely attempt it.
The instructor had been blunt. Where had he met that instructor? It was in a large city. The instructor had said that refined swordsmanship comes from a refined body. After receiving his teachings, Enkrid had a rather bitter experience. As he pondered, he started to feel hungry. When injured, it was important to eat well and rest.
Food's here.
Crace brought him some food just in time. Thin wheat bread, thick bacon, dried fruits, and cheese. It was a feast.
Did you raid the supply tent? No. The supply company commander seems grateful to you. If things had gone wrong, he might have lost his head.
Crace said this while tapping his neck with his hand. It made sense. The rear camp existed to supply the troops. If they had been thoroughly ransacked by the enemy, whose fault would it be? Who was responsible? No need to ask, it was the supply company commander's responsibility. If there had been a fire in the supply tent, he could have been executed. A commander who loses a battle may be tolerated, but a commander who fails in their duty to maintain security cannot be forgiven.
Let's eat.
Enkrid ate and drank, drinking water instead of alcohol. Christ took care of him, if not meticulously, at least attentively. 3 days passed like this.
We're heading out. Will you join?
Vengeance asked, fully armed. The reinforcements had arrived at the rear. The situation at the front lines was reportedly getting more intense. With all his squad members at the front, Enkrid had to go as well. His wounds from the sword cuts and stabs weren't fully healed, but walking was no problem.
I have to go.
Christ stood beside him, lost in thought.
seeing the platoon leader wield a sword.
It didn't seem like he was going to die anytime soon. Maybe he should stop staying in the rear and follow along. Even picking up a few fallen spoils of war could be quite profitable. Moreover, with the supply commander replaced and unfamiliar faces among the soldiers from the newly arrived 3rd Regiment, staying in the rear wasn't appealing. Since things had turned out this way,
Let's go out and collect some spoils.
so Christ decided to join as well. Despite resting for 3 days, Esther still seemed weak. Enkrid picked Esther up. She wasn't very heavy. Is she eating well? Why does it seem like she's not growing at all? Young creatures are supposed to grow quickly, aren't they? It seemed like her size hadn't changed much since he first saw her.
Are you eating well?
Enkrid asked, patting Esther's head. Esther blinked and looked up. There was a man with eyes similar to hers. Who was worrying about whom? He had almost died again. Esther tapped Enkrid's chest with her front paw. She was telling him not to worry about her.
All right, I'll make sure to get you some food when I can.
It seemed Enkrid misunderstood her. But it wasn't a big deal. You foolish human, let's go. Esther closed her eyes, still tired. Enkrid started walking. The only noticeable difference was that he now carried 2 swords at his waist.
2 swords.
Vengeance asked. Enkrid nodded. He had seen Enkrid use his left hand, and had even sparred with him. Enkrid was known for doing strange things, so Vengeance didn't think much of it. Joined by Vengeance's platoon, they marched towards the front lines. The journey was uneventful. Upon arriving at the front, they were greeted by the cold air of the battlefield. As they walked through the path, the mingled scent of blood and metal filled the air, and the sky grew dark, threatening rain. The place was filled with a mix of stagnant water, blood, metal, and other smells giving off the scent of death. It was the front-line base, and there—
Damn, I thought I'd wait forever. Huh, what's this? I told you to rest and you're more injured? Huh?
Well, it just happened.
Enkrid's platoon members were present. Rem, who seemed ready to start a fight, was calmed down with a gesture. It felt like something always happened whenever he was separated from them. But what could he do? Things had turned out this way. Thanks to Vengeance making the report on their behalf, Enkrid joined the platoon in the barracks and briefly explained what had happened in the rear.
You always have fun without me.
Rem muttered, picking his nose in frustration, and that was the end of it. They survived, and being here was all that mattered. When Enkrid settled down in a corner of the tent and asked for an update on the battlefield, Jackson came over and quietly filled him in.
Both sides are just watching each other.
It turned out there hadn't been any significant battles recently. The forces gathered here, including reinforcements, amounted to more than 2 battalions of infantry. So, over 1,000 infantry soldiers had assembled. In addition to this, there were the Royal Guard, scouts, and rear guards protecting the supply lines.
This is supposed to be the start of a full-scale war.
The main battle. Knights, wizards, and shamans were waiting in the Green Pearl Plains for the main clash. In this situation, both armies were closely watching this fight. No one knew exactly how things had come to this, but it was said that the situation had become complicated. The infantry battle to block alternative routes had become the starting point for all the battles. Whoever won here would set the tone for the rest of the conflict. This fight would undoubtedly impact the main battle. It would affect morale, and if they won, give their side more advantageous positions to use. Opening up alternate routes would also make it easier to deploy special units. Both nations' main forces were wary, avoiding deploying additional support beyond infantry, so they were in a standoff. The atmosphere in the unit was tense, as if a full-scale battle could erupt at any moment. The tension was visible in everyone's sharp nerves. Except, of course, for the Madman Squadron, so Enkrid thought. It's a battle, it's soon, what should I do? I'll just train, and remained calm. Waking up at dawn, Enkrid trained his body with the isolation technique as usual. The night watchman, observing this, thought it was typical of the Madman platoon leader. It felt like witnessing a long-standing tradition, passed down from the troublesome squad leader before him. Rain or shine, swinging his sword relentlessly. That was him.
There are no normal people in this squad,
the watchman muttered as he watched Enkrid.
Moving around from dawn, are you, brother?
Before the sun even rose, the watchman turned away, as he saw the friendly madman and the training maniac grappling and twisting each other's limbs. It seemed like they were just having a conversation, and suddenly they were twisting wrists and hugging wildly.
Are their heads screwed on right?
The situation felt tense, as if a deadly battle could break out at any moment, making the watchmen feel anxious. Morale was already low, and the unit's atmosphere was at its worst, yet they seemed to be doing all sorts of things.
Something seems to have changed in the past few days, brother.
It was Auden, a master of the devilish art of words hidden behind a humble smile. He would often tell him to stop training or that he could rest, but if they did, he would come down on him hard. No, he probably wouldn't even treat a rat that way. Of course, Enkrid found this quite satisfying. What path did his greed extend towards? It was in learning and progressing forward. So such teachings were always welcome. Beside the large figure of Odin, who moved through the morning mist, Enkrid was slowly standing up and sitting down with his legs shoulder-width apart, putting strain on his thigh muscles. Auden suddenly reached out to Enkrid. Enkrid instinctively blocked the hand. Smack, smack. It was a technique from wrestling or martial arts, known as Valaf-style martial arts. A hand that had been blocked once moved to twist and target Enkrid's body. As Auden tried to grab his shoulder, Enkrid blocked, twisted, and blocked with his shoulder. Then a foot came in. When he blocked that, a large palm suddenly obscured his view, pushing down on him as if to crush him. Stuck close like that, Auden spoke.
You've improved a lot.
It was something he had heard even back at the rear base. Thanks to learning Enkrid's style martial arts from Finn, his techniques had improved, but he still couldn't match Auden. From the beginning, they had different heights, bone structures, and muscle densities. Auden was far stronger than Enkrid, and despite his large size, he had excellent agility. At some point, Auden's hand came in from an unseen angle and grabbed Enkrid by the nape. With Auden pulling him in with strength, there was no way to resist. They say even one's body can be a weapon in close combat, in the space between wrestling and martial arts. Auden often said,
Don't engage if your build is different.
Enkrid had once asked how to overcome a difference in build.
With different techniques. So, what must you do?
What else? Train hard. It was something he heard repeatedly after being twisted and hit on the training mat. Auden, who had already subdued Enkrid, began to sing something resembling a hymn in a deep voice.
The Lord said, snap the joints.
No, God probably wouldn't say that. Of course, it was a joke. Auden didn't apply any more pressure, even though he was already holding down Enkrid's nape and shoulder. It was still plenty painful just being like this.
I grabbed it by feel.
His reaction had been slow. There were many reasons for that. Among them, injuries were likely a factor. Pain tends to slow down reactions.
You'll have to fight again if you go into battle. Won't you, brother platoon leader?
As if that needed saying. It was obvious. Although his right wrist was a bit bothersome, it wasn't entirely unusable. Moreover, the reason he was called here was because of them. Of course, if a battle broke out, he would go to the front lines and fight again.
With a body like this, it's too much, brother.
As Auden held him down, he spoke. Enkrid's right shoulder had been slashed, his left forearm stabbed, his right wrist was still in a splint, and bruises covered his body. He had long since run out of Jackson's ointment and had only been able to apply some herbal poultices. Given how often he got injured, it was no surprise the ointment ran out quickly. There wasn't much of it, to begin with.
How long do you plan to keep doing this?
What was Sibi trying to do? After subduing someone, they usually reviewed the sparring session. It was time to release him and enter that phase, but Auden's grip remained firm.
Platoon leader, brother.
He called to him in that state. Enkrid, still half bent over, answered reluctantly.
Why?
The morning mist was so thick that the surroundings were not clearly visible. The mist was so dense that they could only see each other's faces when they were a few steps apart. There was a sentry nearby, but he had lost interest in what was happening after a quick glance. Realizing the situation, Auden made up his mind and acted. There was a faint sound. Enkrid heard a sound he had never heard before in his life. It wasn't so much a sound in his ears as something that seemed to pierce directly into his body. A warmth spread through him, something you wouldn't expect to feel by the misty riverbank at this hour before the morning sun rose, a warmth even rarer at this time of day. It felt like the warmth of the afternoon sun, the kind you'd feel sitting leisurely and reading a book, or perfect for a nap. How could he describe it? Peace? Something had seeped into his entire body. A moment passed, filled with peace, warmth, comfort, and a gentle tingling sensation radiating from his injuries. It wasn't a long time. Finally, Auden's strong hand released Enkrid's neck. Enkrid looked up at Auden. He had once been called a religious squad member. He seemed as devout as any priest, and sometimes priests showed miracles or wonders. People called these miracles divine power.
This.
No, brother. You will not say anything, and you will not tell anyone. I swear to the Lord you will do as I say.
Enkrid looked into Auden's eyes. A faint yellow hue shone in his blurred pupils. It seemed to Enkrid that light, a kind of radiance, was present there.
Swear it.
All right.
Auden said no more and turned away.
The mist by the river is also the Lord's blessing.
Auden knelt down to begin his morning prayer. Seriously, Enkrid scratched his head a few times.
What is he thinking?
Sometimes he wondered why his squad members went to such lengths for him. Did he look pitiful just by sight? Did watching him struggle make them feel sympathetic? He didn't know. His curiosity faded quickly. What did it matter? No one knew that Auden Plumray could wield divine power. Using divine power might be tied to some religious rules or dogma. What was certain, based on his feeling, was that Auden had taken a risk.
Lord, forgive me.
Seeing the beginning of his prayer like that, it seemed correct.
He didn't have to go this far.
Still, it wasn't like he could return what he received. Enkrid removed the bandage from his wrist. He flexed his right wrist a few times. From his experience of being injured and recovering several times, his wrist would be usable without issue.
In a day or two.
The other wounds hidden under the bandage seemed to have healed significantly as well. The lingering pain had significantly subsided.
Thank you.
He spoke to the large praying platoon member, but Auden, immersed in prayer, did not respond.
Lord.
Amidst the smell of wet earth, the scent of death that often pervades the battlefield mingled. For Auden, it was hard to just stand by and watch his platoon leader.
Lord, you are always present.
He asked his silent lord. Was what he had done the right thing? If it was discovered that he had used divine power, an inquisitor would come. He had left the order with many restrictions. Even if it wasn't a vow, he had placed restrictions on his body at the level of a solemn pledge. Enduring these restrictions to wield some divine power, he felt a piercing pain in his head, as if someone were driving a spike into it. Still,
I couldn't just stand by and watch, Lord.
the one who burns himself with the fire of effort was being rewarded. He couldn't let that flame be extinguished here. It could be called capriciousness, but Auden simply wanted to do it, so he did. Meeting Enkrid, he believed the Lord's words were within him.
So I will follow my heart.
Auden finished his prayer. The morning's sunlight began to break through, dispersing the mist. Even though he used divine power to heal his body, not all wounds were healed at once. Doing so would alert the more sensitive individuals to the divine power used, and the restrictions made it difficult to use more. Still, the platoon leader seemed much better than before.
Well.
Enkrid, exhaling and moving, seemed much lighter. God and man, blessings and curses. The issue remained unresolved, but at least watching his platoon leader brought peace to his mind. Though he frowned due to enduring pain, Auden thought he would not regret today's actions. It was a feeling, an intuition, and a certainty. After finishing the morning training, it was time to reapply his bandages.
Big eyes.
He called out to Kreis. The entrance flap of the tent fluttered open.
Is it here?
A small figure with green eyes. A superior officer with abilities that did not match his small stature. In other words, a person who played a part in creating the current Madmen platoon. A fairy who had formed an independent platoon and brought them to the battlefield without Enkrid.
I heard you were injured.
Yes.
As soon as she entered, she spoke directly to Enkrid and threw something. Enkrid caught it in midair. It was a round wooden container, a flat wooden container similar in size to the ointment received from Jackson, with a leaf-shaped engraving on the lid, suggesting it was made by someone with considerable skill.
Company commander.
Apply it. Fairy medicine is priceless, even worth gold. It's an engagement gift.
Enkrid still couldn't get used to the fairy's jokes. It was an unexpected moment, so he wore a puzzled expression. To come in suddenly, throw something, and call it an engagement gift.
That expression is great. I like it.
The company commander left after saying that. Did she really come just to give ointment?
I'm genuinely curious, platoon leader. What's your secret?
Kreis asked, having watched from the side. Enkrid, equally puzzled, responded.
I'm wondering about that myself. Why did she suddenly come by and throw ointment at me?
As the company commander mentioned, fairies are excellent at handling such medicines. During the assassination incident at the infirmary, it seemed like the company commander also had a deep knowledge of pharmacology, judging by how she identified the poison.
It looks like it'll be better than mine. At times like this, magic is quite useful.
Jackson said from behind, casually cleaning and maintaining his equipment without even turning his head. Though he seemed indifferent, he was actually paying close attention to everything around him. That's why he was most attuned to the battlefield situation and the atmosphere.
That's not the reason.
Enkrid shook his head. The very fact that he joked about it indicated that wasn't the reason. Rem started chuckling beside him.
Just have 3 kids.
Crazy guy.
Platoon leader, how about you leave the army and open a salon with me?
Kreis chimed in, taking it a step further. He joked about how such talents were rare and how it would be better to cultivate his innate magical talents rather than his newly blossomed sword skills. Even though they had nothing better to do, Enkrid had no desire to spend his days indulging the whims of noble women, so he spoke up, telling them to shut up and help him unwrap the bandages. Ragna, who had been watching the situation closely, spoke up.
So, can we spar?
Lately, it seemed like Ragna was more eager than Enkrid.
You lazy idiot, you think just putting on some ointment will heal his wounds?
Rem chided. Ragna didn't respond, just looked disappointed. Yeah, it probably wouldn't heal with just some ointment. The ointment wasn't the issue. He had just undergone a miracle that even high-ranking nobles rarely saw. Kreis unwrapped the bandages, and Enkrid turned his shoulder to hide the wounds as he applied the ointment himself.
I'll apply it for you.
Kreis offered, but Enkrid shook his head.
No need.
Shh, are you saying it's a gift from a lover?
Enkrid, sitting on the bed, extended one leg to kick Kreis in the thigh, and then carefully spread the ointment on his shoulder. He repeated the process on his left forearm, feeling a cool sensation spread from the wounded area.
It must be good medicine.
The cooling effect was stronger than the ointment Jackson had given him. Enkrid rewrapped the bandage. Now he felt he could move fairly well. Feeling better, he wondered if he should swing his sword a few times. There didn't seem to be any immediate combat on the horizon. They were just staring each other down in a standoff. If things went south, a fight could break out at any moment.
Anyway, you bore a lot. If you're going to fight, do it until your heads get cracked open.
Rem had complained that there hadn't been any large-scale battles lately, leaving him frustrated. Should he swing his sword? Or perhaps he should still rest. He was debating this when he heard a long horn blast from outside. In Naurilia, it was traditional to blow a horn trumpet in the field to alert soldiers, as opposed to a whistle for ambushes.
Enemy forces are coming. All troops assemble. Assemble by unit.
The sound of a messenger shouting echoed from outside the tent.
They're back, those crazy bastards.
Rem pouted and muttered under his breath.
Did you know? Those guys are really something else, squad leader of enchantment.
Drop the last nickname, will you?
What was going on as he hurriedly started putting on his equipment?
Even if a fight breaks out, don't jump in. Take care of your body first.
Rem added.
I think it's best to focus on recovery until you're ready for sparring again.
Ragna agreed. Audin just smiled. It was remarkable to see someone of his size smile in a way that evoked the word compassion.
Were you thinking of fighting? You must be crazy going out in that condition.
Jackson scolded him outright. Was he being treated like a child left by the river? The platoon members wouldn't actually treat him like that. They just didn't want to see him get hurt again. Don't think about getting injured in front of their eyes. That's what it sounded like to him. Whether it was Audin, who had used divine power, or the others, they all had the same concern. These were his platoon members. Looking at it this way, the battalion commander's choice to place him here seemed wise. After all, they were operating under his command.
I'm not sure if this counts as control, though.
Enkrid still didn't feel confident about handling his platoon members as he wished, nor did he have any intention of doing so.
Assembly, sir.
It was Andrew's voice from outside the tent. He was on guard duty along with Mac and Henry. They were intentionally scheduled together on duty as a form of consideration from the soldier who managed the rotations, likely due to Rem's relentless teasing. One could only wonder how much teasing it took for such an arrangement to be made.
Let's go.
Enkrid said as he stood up. Although his shoulder had been cut, his leather armor was still sturdy. Over it, he wore a gambeson and had swords strapped to both sides of his waist. He felt a bit more secure. It was time to see what the enemy was up to. He wondered what the enemy would do this time. Were they going to incessantly challenge them to duels again? Apparently, their opponents kept asking for one-on-one combat with their warriors.
I'm tired of those fights. I wanted to swing my axe hard for my platoon leader, but there hasn't been any real battle, has there?
Rem had complained, even though he had avoided the duels the previous night. As they arrived at the battlefield,
"Hey, you underdeveloped brats."
an enemy soldier's voice rang out. What is going on? The two armies faced each other on a gravel field with a river on the left and mountains and forests on the right. They were within arrow range. Some archers from both sides were already getting ready. With a tense atmosphere, the moment was ripe for spears to pierce throats, swords to swing, or maces to crush helmets. But it began with, well, what could it be called?
Provocation?
"Hey, you won't even get to use your gear before you die, huh?"
3 men stepped forward and shouted loudly. Their voices were clear. The insults hit hard despite the distance of over 300 paces. Their voices were that loud. It seemed like a pointless act, but
Is this working?
it was working. Morale was already low, and now this added humiliation made it unbearable. But if they fired arrows and charged, with the numbers being nearly equal, low morale meant the battle was lost before it began so.
Watching and waiting seems right.
But would just watching lead to a solution? It seemed they needed to use some extraordinary tactics or send a small elite force to cause chaos. Even without a keen sense of the battle, it was clear something needed to be done immediately. Still, Enkrid was more relaxed than the others. At least he didn't feel like he was going to die here. Whether he got minor injuries or not, whether his platoon members were nearby or not. It was just an instinct. He had grown significantly in that regard. If this were before, he would be desperately thinking of ways to survive. But now he was analyzing the situation.
Am I getting complacent?
It seemed trivial. At least for now, it wasn't Enkrid's problem to worry about. If he were leading a unit or responsible for his subordinates' lives, this would naturally be a concern. Enkrid wondered if it was right for him to lead this crazy squad. They were all following him voluntarily, so for now he needed to handle the immediate situation.
Andrew, don't get worked up.
Enkrid raised a hand to stop Andrew's chest.
What?
Being a virgin isn't something to be ashamed of.
He repeated this to soothe Andrew's wounded feelings. He remembered how Andrew had been. They met during a mission with the scout squad, and the enemy had used the same insult that had been used to provoke him before. He needed to calm Andrew down to keep him from losing his composure.
It seems like they're mocking me.
Andrew muttered, his eyes drooping. It wasn't the case, it was a misunderstanding. Enkrid reassured him.
Hold it in now. The time to unleash your anger will come.
But I will keep moving forward. I'm not even angry, and I don't think that insult was directed at me.
Not now, I said. Hold on.
Enkrid comforted Andrew, who was pretending to be nonchalant. He was proactive about it. He even patted Andrew on the shoulder and gently pushed him back. Andrew stepped back weakly.
Ahem.
Next to him, Henry cleared his throat. Mac looked awkward. The other platoon members... Rem started chuckling. Even Jackson, who usually showed no expression, gave a faint smile as he glanced at Andrew.
Brother, it's okay. Seek solace in the divine.
Auden even suggested Andrew become a monk. Ragna glanced at Andrew and nodded.
It's all right. There's still a chance.
A chance for what? It's not like he didn't do it because he couldn't.
Why are you all doing this to me?
Andrew truly had no ulterior thoughts. He had even forgotten the words Enkrid used to provoke him in the past. If it hadn't been brought up now, it might have never resurfaced. He had to train his swordsmanship. He had to save his family. Anything else was a luxury for him. He was a diligent worker, committed to filling his life with purpose. So why were they teasing him over this?
It's all right, man.
Rem lightly punched Andrew's shoulder. Andrew felt wronged, and a new anger surged within him. Naturally, this anger turned outward. If he directed his anger here, he wouldn't live to see the next morning. His instincts redirected his anger.
It's because of those crazy ghouls.
The ones who had shouted about the gear were the problem. He wanted to rip open the mouths of those enemy soldiers. The exchange of insults continued. A few men from their side responded, but it felt like they were losing. A verbal battle, of all things. It seemed absurd, but the enemy's strategy and intent were clear. They wanted to crush their morale completely. It was evident, seeing how the atmosphere worsened with just a few words. However, around Enkrid, the mood was light-hearted. While it seemed insignificant in the grand scope of the battlefield.
When we return to the city, I can introduce you to a good salon. Just don't lose your first time in the red light district. For your first time, it's better to be with an experienced older woman. I know an aunt who might be suitable.
The soldiers around started making teasing comments.
Will you all shut up?
Andrew glared fiercely at everyone. Thanks to his sacrifice, the mood around them lightened. The best way to deal with insults was to ignore them.
Quite a talent you have.
Chryse, understanding Enkrid's intention, made a comment. It was a time when a change in atmosphere was needed. Everything begins with small steps. Chryse was contemplating what he would do if he were the commander. Normally, he would be idly waiting for the battle to end from the rear. But here he stood on the battlefield. Naturally, he began thinking about ways to survive, which means thinking about what was needed to win the battle. The first step was to change the atmosphere. Enkrid had started that.
A talent! I was genuinely concerned. There was an order not to step forward and fight.
It was clearly a joke. Was this all planned? No, it didn't seem like that. It was probably done instinctively.
He's quite a peculiar person.
This was part of Enkrid's charm. Despite living a tough life, he never forgot to joke and never tolerated a grim atmosphere's fee. Andrew's face turned red from being teased, but the atmosphere around the mad independent platoon began to shift. So, what now? Let's fight already. That's the feeling, the kind of vibe that started spreading. The platoon was made up of people with that kind of mindset. So Rem, feeling restless, spoke up.
But how long are we just going to watch?
It would be better to have a fight to relieve the tension. Both armies were filled with tension but hadn't made a move. They were holding their bowstrings taut, ready to shoot at any moment. Some of the more nervous ones couldn't sleep properly and were even getting nauseous. Understandably so. This tense atmosphere had been going on for days. Rem and the others were starting to get annoyed. Fortunately, the three new members, Andrew, Mac, and Henry, were in good spirits. They stood watch together. Having bonded over being harassed by Rem and the other platoon members, they had grown closer. Henry kept his distance but fit in well enough. Enduring Rem and the others was no easy task. As a result, they were not swept away by the pervasive sense of defeat that had spread among the entire army. They were too busy dealing with harassment and standing guard to have time for other thoughts.
Want to say something?
Chryse suddenly suggested. The army's stance was clear. They were waiting for the enemy's attack. Chryse suggested Enkrid take advantage of that. Enkrid was recognized by all the platoon members, even the sharp-tongued Rem. His words and ideas were enough to unsettle the enemy.
I don't really have anything to say.
Whether he was eloquent or not, what could he say in such an atmosphere? Enkrid was sincere. Still, Chryse insisted.
Just to change the mood.
Why not? It didn't seem like a difficult task. The enemy and ally were fighting with words instead of swords and spears. Enkrid moved slightly. The independent platoon had no fixed positions. As they moved, a path naturally opened. A few familiar soldiers asked where he was going as he passed by. Enkrid replied in a calm tone to those who asked.
Just going to add a few words.
At that point, Enkrid didn't have much in mind. The enemy was busy mocking them, calling them useless, and questioning what the Queen's consorts could do. Enkrid stood at the forefront where vengeance was present.
Back at the front as soon as we return from the rear. Our unit has maintained its strength the best.
It seemed they had replaced their archers with all spearmen. This was the 3rd platoon of the 2nd company, placing Enkrid at the front of the 2nd company. Enkrid glanced at vengeance, and then at the enemy soldiers in the distance. He seemed to know what to say. Enkrid boldly stepped forward a few more paces. Rem, Ragna, and Jackson joined him. They were beyond the range where arrows could easily reach, but Enkrid remained fearless. If it was going to be a battle of words, and if low morale was an issue, why not show some boldness?
Hey, you there, come out.
He shouted, provoking the enemy. He was challenging them, implying that they had stepped forward, so what would the enemy do? It was a bold question. The pattern of these battles had been established. After verbal exchanges, There would be a duel challenge by lower-ranked soldiers. It was a way to assert dominance through combat without involving commanders. So, why not do the same here?
I'll do it.
Kreis had given him a few pointers, which sounded reasonable to Enkrid.
You can take down 5 in a row, right? That should be enough.
The plan was simple. If Enkrid participated in the duels and overwhelmed the enemy, it would demonstrate the disparity in strength, even if the enemy commanders chose to intervene.
Overwhelmingly.
The idea was to show the gap in skill by killing the enemy repeatedly, and to force the enemy commanders to intervene only to defeat them as well. Kreis seemed to have a plan, something about boosting morale and achieving a greater goal. Enkrid trusted Kreis' intellect and cunning, which is why he stepped onto the battlefield. As he moved forward provocatively, the Allied soldiers murmured,
"What's going on? Ah, it's the madman platoon leader. Enkrid, the spellbreaker?"
For those who knew him, Enkrid was a familiar face, a well-known figure in the unit. More importantly, he had recently proven his skill, showing he wasn't someone to be underestimated. The entire Allied army felt a strange sensation. Even Vengeance, seeing Enkrid step forward, sensed something was about to happen. The reason unclear. The battlefield's atmosphere was like a sharp blade. Until now it seemed to have been pointed towards the Allied forces, but now it felt like the wind was changing direction. Kreis believed his plan would work.
Well, let's see how this goes.
He had a rough idea of what the Allied commander, Major Marcus, was waiting for. Having heard rumors about Marcus and guessed his combat style, he figured something was being prepared. Kreis decided to help set things in motion. If his guess was wrong, they could always retreat quietly. In any case, the potential loss was minimal, and the possible gain was significant. As Enkrid stepped forward, shifting the atmosphere, an enemy soldier who had been mocking them stepped out.
"Here he comes, you bastard."
Enkrid didn't have any particular insults in mind as he approached, but he did brush past Vengeance. Why did Vengeance dislike him? The conclusion was simple, his face.
And what about you? Why do you have a ghoul's head?
With a casual remark, Enkrid's words echoed softly through the wind. The comment wasn't particularly profound, but at a distance where they could vaguely see each other's faces, the enemy soldier, whom Enkrid referred to as Ghoul Head, looked at him.
"What the hell?"
The enemy soldier's annoyance spiked upon seeing Enkrid's face, handsome and irritatingly so.
"What?"
Was your mother a ghoul?
Enkrid suggested, wondering if the soldier's mother might be of another race. Thinking it was a reasonable suspicion, he pointed at the enemy's face.
"What, you son of a bitch?"
The enemy soldier immediately erupted in anger. It was a miracle born from just 2 exchanges of words. Auden, hearing this, couldn't help but be amazed.
Even the gods would punish such words.
Rem burst into laughter. The others were no different. Despite Mac telling him not to go, Andrew had followed behind, and now his face brightened with a smile. Yeah, with a face like that, what could he possibly say? His appearance was unusually wild. With a nose so upturned it seemed like it could catch raindrops and eyes so small. You could hardly see their color without a close look. His face was covered in blemishes. It was understandable that he could be mistaken for a ghoul. Andrew laughed brightly.
"Let's see if your hands are as sharp as your tongue."
The enemy soldier had taken the bait. What started with words was about to escalate into a clash of spears, swords, and blood. Enkrid naturally wanted to step forward. Wasn't that why he had come out? He was also starting to feel the urge to move his body. Using 2 swords at the same time might still be a bit too much, and even if he needed to spare his right hand for recovery, it didn't matter. He was sure after observing the opponent's stance, steps, and gestures. His left hand would be sufficient. The opponent was not Mitch Hurrier. At that moment, the flat side of an axe was placed vertically against Enkrid's stomach. At the same time, Jackson held his sleeve, Auden his shoulder, and Ragna stepped in front of Enkrid.
I'll handle it,
Ragna said.
"Where do you think you're going? You need to recover first,"
Rem added. There was something firm in his eyes, as if indicating that Enkrid couldn't step forward here. The resolve of the entire platoon could be felt. So, would they step forward? Kreis had mentioned that it was better if Rem and the others avoided stepping in unless necessary. Then,
"That's enough, rookie,"
Rem said, holding the axe. The curve of his lips suggested he was quite enjoying the situation, and then he called out to the rookie.
Andrew?
Enkrid's mouth opened, and Andrew tilted his head in confusion. Why was he being called?
Go out and kill that guy.
Rem said. He spoke as if it were the most natural and easiest thing in the world. Andrew blinked and, recalling the anger he had felt earlier. Wasn't that the guy who had insulted him, calling him unripe? The opponent was armed with a spear. The primary force of the Aspen Kingdom was their spearmen infantry. Pointing the relatively short spear forward, there was no more effective weapon in infantry combat than the spear.
Come out, you cowards.
If one had to choose the most insulting word throughout history, coward would certainly be high on the list. Andrew summoned the anger he had momentarily forgotten.
All right.
Andrew stepped forward and so did his opponent. As the two cautiously closed the distance, Mac watched Andrew with concern. Winning or losing wasn't the issue. He worried Andrew might end up like a pincushion if arrows rained down on him. The platoon leader was ruthless with his words.
If it comes to that.
Mac gripped the handle of the buckler tightly. The shield was larger than what he usually used, but he was skilled with sword and shield, a sword and board style.
Block and hold out.
Their side wasn't foolish. If arrows started flying, their archers would respond. Seeing that those standing at the front on both sides carried large shields, it was unlikely the arrow attack would be fatal.
Hold out and withdraw.
Worry was fleeting. On reflection, the figures present were not the kind to perish easily, so it was enough for Mac to just get Andrew out safely. Mac set aside his worries, intending to observe calmly. In reality, aside from arrows, there wasn't much to worry about. He had watched Andrew closely. He had improved grown. He had become more absorbed in the sword. The gaze of their allies was curious. If Enkrid or the others stepped forward, it would obviously be a fight they would win. But it wasn't them. It was another soldier who stepped forward. Andrew Gardner, a noble by birth who had once been a squad leader but had joined Enkrid's squad as a regular soldier. Some thought he was an oddball. Others worried whether he could properly handle his weapon. A tense atmosphere began to spread. How many confident soldiers had been taken down so far? Naturally, people hoped Enkrid or someone else would step forward. Andrew looked at his opponent with anger. The opponent felt the same.
You just talk and leave the fighting to your subordinates, huh?
That wasn't the intention. Andrew had never seen Enkrid avoid a fight. Moreover, the difference in skill would be vast. Even if Enkrid was injured, there was no way this guy could take down their platoon leader. Andrew considered Enkrid a genius. A real genius whose skills improved rapidly. A true talent, unlike himself. He genuinely believed that.
Bring the guy who called me a goalhead.
They didn't hear each other's words. They only expressed their anger. Soon, that anger turned into spears and swords. As the cold mist cleared and sunlight fell on the sparse grass and gravel-covered ground, the two exchanged their thoughts in anger. Seeing the spearhead coming at him, Andrew momentarily recalled the past few months. It hadn't been that long.
Crazy barbarian bastard.
After dealing with Rem's axe, facing an enemy soldier's spear felt like child's play. Of course, if it hit, it would pierce a hole in his body. It was a decisive blow that couldn't be carelessly deflected.
A guy who hesitates when he sees an opening has no right to complain if he dies, kid.
Rem's repeated words had become ingrained in him. Mac acknowledged that Andrew had talent. Rem saw it too. He was someone worth nurturing, different from Enkrid in his own way. Of course, they had only trained him up to a certain point. They hadn't shown him the heart of the beast or mentioned other techniques. Those were skills not to be shared lightly. For Andrew, it was enough. He did have genuine talent, quite exceptional talent. Seeing the spear coming, Andrew swung his sword from right to left. If the spear was advantageous for straight attacks, the sword, a shorter weapon, was better for horizontal attacks. As the spear bounced off to the side, Andrew stepped forward, crunching on the gravel, closing the distance. The start of a fight and its end are both determined by the feet. The enemy soldier pulled back the spear and swung his elbow. Andrew, maintaining his forward momentum, swung his sword. The upward slicing blade half split the man's forearm. Blood sprayed from the arm of the soldier clad in a gambeson. Amid the splattering blood, Andrew's eyes gleamed. Was there any need to just cut and end it? No, this was a fight and a war. Andrew's foot moved again. A step to the left, then he swung his sword again, striking the spear shaft with a sharp sound. He then calmly thrust his sword forward. The speed wasn't fast nor slow, but it was enough for the enemy soldier, who was reeling from the pain of his wounded arm. Andrew felt a certain resistance through the grip of his sword. The blade had lodged between the gaps in the armor and helmet. As Andrew pulled the blade out, about half a foot deep, blood gushed forth. The enemy soldier staggered and fell to his knees. He tried to clutch his neck, but it was futile. The difference in skill was stark. This happened because Andrew was skilled. The enemy soldier was also a well-trained regular soldier, a soldier who had killed many of their own troops until now. But he was no match for Andrew, who had been honed by Rem's harsh training and was full of talent. As the enemy, kneeling and clutching his neck, fell forward, his hands flailed. He didn't have long to live. He would die even if left alone. Andrew, standing behind his enemy, drove his sword in vertically. He made sure to kill him. With that resolve, the sword entered from the back of the neck, taking the last breath of the enemy soldier. Silence and the quiet sunlight were all that remained. Kreis, watching from a step behind, thought this outcome was better than if Enkrid had stepped forward. It was an unexpected person's achievement.
Mad Andrew.
The name that had previously eaten away at their morale now sounded like a nightmare for the enemy. Andrew's name echoed all around as he killed the enemy soldier.
Woohoo, madman.
Andrew.
What was this? Even as Enkrid listened, he shrugged. The effect was better than expected. It almost felt like the cheers were for him. Among the shouts for Andrew, there were cries of him being a hero who killed the goalhead. Rem chuckled.
Captain, the rookie can handle it.
When did he become a rookie?
Andrew, fall back.
Mac shouted to Andrew. It was time to retreat. Andrew took a few steps back, but he didn't let his guard down, still watching the enemy.
I'm all grown up now, you bastards.
Oh, what was he saying now? Mac was taken aback. This time, even Enkrid couldn't help but laugh. Had he left some lingering feelings by teasing him?
Come back, Andrew.
Andrew's return after killing the enemy soldier was met with cheers. It was the moment the atmosphere began to shift. What Kreis had anticipated was starting. It was the moment that Marcus, the battalion commander, had been waiting for. Marcus was starting to feel a bit dry-mouthed.
Something needs to happen.
In his judgment, the numbers were similar, and the level of training was comparable, but the damned Aspen soldiers had skillfully presented themselves. They had sent out their most skilled soldiers to engage in what seemed like nightly duels. As a result, morale was low. Still, it was manageable. However, a shift in the atmosphere was necessary. He had hoped to see that change from the so-called Madman Squad. But when Rem, the barbarian soldier, stepped forward,
why does the atmosphere feel even more ghoul-like?
A dirty, vile, and toxic atmosphere. Both their own troops and the enemy reacted coldly. Should he try to change the atmosphere elsewhere? It was during these thoughts that it happened. An unknown soldier from the Madmen Squad, one of the soldiers taken in just to fill the numbers, easily defeated an enemy soldier, not a close victory, but an overwhelming one. The time was now.
Send them.
At Marcus' command, both the messenger and the adjutant moved. Soon, a small flag was raised above the battalion commander's tent. This signal reached the unit commander waiting near the river, where there were scattered rocks. If Aspen had the Greyhound, Norilia had the Slaughterer of the Frontier. They were all soldiers capable of taking on 10 men at once.
Fools.
Marcus welcomed the enemy commander's clumsy maneuver. The atmosphere on the battlefield can change in an instant, especially when morale, which had been at rock bottom, surges. The impact is even greater. Moreover, Marcus believed that victory in battle ultimately came down to who could kill more effectively. So,
kill them all.
Though Marcus's mutterings went unheard, the order had already been given. The Border Patrol, Norilia's proud independent company, moved as one to strike the enemy's flank. From appearing to be a small force hiding among the rocks, and near the water to the moment they charged and engaged the enemy, it was an unexpected blow for the Aspen commander.
Sweep them.
The Border Patrol captain ordered, and the unit carried it out. Torres was among them. An approaching enemy soldier thrust a spear. Grabbing the spear shaft with his hand and pulling, the enemy resisted. Using that pulling force, Torres closed the distance and thrust a dagger under the enemy's chin. With a short noise, The enemy soldier with a metal beard under his chin fell sideways. Torres didn't have time to retrieve his dagger and immediately charged at the next enemy. The rest of the border patrol was equally engaged in battle. Hayun, a soldier from the north known for his excellent swordsmanship, was among them. Hayun's sword danced through the air, swiftly taking the lives of 2 enemy soldiers. Half-turning, he delivered a powerful slash. The shield of the enemy soldier blocking the strike flew back, and the heavy blow sent the soldier reeling. The airborne soldier was finished off by Eisen. Eisen's specialty was the trident. Originally a fisherman, he was adept with the 3-pronged spear. Eisen's trident pierced the back of an enemy soldier. The central blade of the trident penetrated through the gambeson, out of the armor, and through the abdomen. Barney, known for her speed, was also in the midst of the fight. Being a woman was no disadvantage for this soldier. Barney darted between the enemy soldiers, throwing daggers and then leaping back to hurl stones with her sling. Thud, whiz, crack. An enemy soldier, struck in the head by a stone, collapsed to the side. Leather helmets were no match for the impact of projectiles launched from a sling. Although the carved stones used were labor-intensive to produce, their effectiveness was undeniable. The Border Patrol was made up of individuals with distinct personalities. They specialized in guerrilla warfare rather than large-scale battles, and so they fought, breaking through and killing as they advanced. Torres, leading his platoon, began to press into one side. Beside him, Hyun swung his sword multiple times, fending off enemy soldiers. Their target was the group of soldiers with longbows, their true objective being to take out the commander of the archers. Each squad of the Border Patrol moved toward their respective targets, causing a significant shift in the battlefield. The enemy commander, unwilling to risk further disruption to the already chaotic battlefield, made a decision.
Retreat.
The Border Patrol was to hold off the Greyhound, while the rest of the enemy forces pulled back. If it were wind, it would be a storm. If it was an earthquake, it would be a major quake. If there were waves, it would be a tsunami. The flow of a battlefield is always prone to such upheaval. It was strange that they had been in a standoff for so long. Enkrid also sensed the change in the atmosphere. Even if he hadn't seen the movements of the Border Patrol, something had definitely started. If not,
Fire.
it was unlikely that their own archers would act in such a manner. Twip, twip, twip. Arrows arched over the heads of Enkrid and the Madmen platoon members. In contrast, the enemy's counterattack was feeble. Only a few arrows flew back in return. Instead, a swift scout unit equipped with crossbows and light armor pursued Enkrid's group.
Kill them all. Leave no one alive.
Enkrid quickly assessed the situation.
Turn around, attack, and then pull back to the side.
He gave the order. There were at most 20 pursuers. There was no need to retreat. 2 squads were manageable.
Sounds good.
Rem shouted excitedly, swinging his axe. He was so enthusiastic that Henry, standing next to him, had to dodge aside to avoid the wildly swinging axe.
They're armed with crossbows.
Henry shouted after looking back. Was that a problem? It wouldn't be. Enkrid himself had dodged incoming arrows several times. His platoon members should be capable of doing the same. The more he learned and improved, the more he saw new possibilities. They were strong. With Rem in the lead, the Madman squad, positioned behind him, stopped and turned to charge back down the path they had come from. They found themselves at the forefront of the assault, with Rem at the head.
Fire. Kill them.
The commander of the Aspen Light Armor Unit shouted. 3 soldiers who were running ahead aimed and fired their loaded crossbows. It was said that dodging bolts from a crossbow at this distance was a feat of skill, something only a master could even attempt. Rem dodged the bolts by rolling forward at the perfect timing. The bolts struck the ground right where Rem had been. It looked close, but coming from Rem, it didn't seem dangerous. Even while rolling, Rem's running speed barely decreased. He rolled, used his axe to steady himself as he rose, and continued running. How does one handle their body to do such things? Enkrid, watching from behind, couldn't help but be impressed.
Just keep watching.
Rachna kept restraining Enkrid from getting involved. Otherwise, Enkrid would have wanted to join in. But there was no opportunity for that. Starting with Rem, everything was quickly resolved. Before the 3 soldiers who fired the crossbows could reload, Rem was almost upon them. The enemy soldiers reflexively drew their short swords, different armament from the spearmen. Even if 3 or 4 spearmen formed a formation with their spears, Rem wouldn't bat an eye. Certainly not. But 3 short swords, there was no chance of them being a match. The scene unfolded exactly as Enkrid had predicted. As Rem's axe cleaved through the air, one soldier's head was severed, and the axe traced a path of light around Rem as he moved like a storm. Everyone caught in that path died. The axe was so fast and powerful that when it split a head, blood and brain matter spilled to the ground only after the axe had already been pulled out. One soldier with a split head flailed his short sword in the air. Before his body's reflexes even finished, the dead soldier collapsed forward. Blood flowed freely onto the ground. Rem, leaving the fallen soldiers behind, began rampaging. Meanwhile, Jackson, who had been unseen, approached the enemy commander from behind. Jackson slit the throat of the commander, who was gaping in shock at Rem. The enemy commander's throat was cut, and blood sprayed out in a gush. The carotid artery had been severed, causing the blood to spurt. Jackson moved again, silently and efficiently, prioritizing targets. Starting with the crossbowman aiming at Enkrid, he acted as planned, taking out enemies from behind with a dagger, slitting their throats, or stabbing them in the lungs. The soldier holding the crossbow had his head twisted backward. In his dying gaze was a pair of emotionless reddish-brown pupils. Killing was just manual labor. It was the epitome of numbness. The soldier met his end staring into those terrifying eyes. Auden merely fended off the attacking enemies. It was enough just to wave his palms left and right. Enemies were sent flying with a single slap to the face. A soldier charging with a short sword, shouting, had his yellow teeth scattered in the air. There was no way to stand against such power. What could they do when a slap sent them flying? Mac also moved, doing his part. Standing back to back with Andrew, Henry in the center repeatedly drew and released the bowstring of his short bow. Ragnar was another force entirely. He took a step forward. As he advanced, there was only death for those caught by his sword. One of the scouts charged with 2 short swords in hand, but it ended with 2 swipes of Ragnar's sword. Blocking the first attack, the scout's sword was deflected, gliding like a swallow through the air, striking the enemy's neck with a sharp crack. The enemy now had a second mouth at their throat. Ragnar, after a few more sword swings, shook his head and flicked his sword in the air. It seemed he wasn't satisfied with the sword he was using. Despite this, he didn't bother getting a proper sword, indicating he was certainly not ordinary. Enkrid had nothing to do. There was no need for him to intervene. The battle ended in an instant. While Mac, Andrew, and Henry killed 2 enemies, the rest were slaughtered.
Let's fall back.
Instead of admiring the scene, Enkrid spoke up that there was no point in getting caught between the advancing armies. They needed to pull back and observe the situation. As they moved to the side, the enemy infantry decorated with shields met with their allied infantry. Like long-separated lovers meeting to exchange love and affection, the 2 armies clashed. Instead of love, tongues, and affection, they gouged out each other's eyes with spears. Spear tips tore into bodies. Both allies and enemies fell. The battle's outcome was already leaning in their favor. It was the first large-scale combat, riding in a great victory due to the border guard's ambush and Rem's rampage. Where did the victory begin? It was clearly with the madman platoon. From the talkative platoon leader to Andrew, who wielded a real sword.
Get out of here. We won, madmen. Well, there's no need to openly call them madmen like that.
The soldiers, especially the allied infantry, had their eyes fixed in one direction. They were looking at the independent platoon members, including Rem, all of whom were smeared with blood. Though everyone had signs of battle, Enkrid, who stood in the center, was unscathed. He hadn't swung a sword even once. He hadn't even thrown a single dagger. The consensus among the platoon members was clear. He should recover his strength first.
It's the madman platoon, Enkrid, Enki, so handsome, good, good, good.
The cheers of those intoxicated with victory poured onto Enkrid and his group. Regardless of who had actually done the fighting, this independent platoon was Enkrid's, so people were calling his name. Enkrid wondered if he should do something, maybe raise his hand in acknowledgement, but he hadn't even swung a sword. After the first battle, he had retreated, and it was the infantry known as the flower of the battlefield. who had done all the actual fighting. So why were they so celebratory?
We're an independent platoon with fewer than 10 members, and we've left this strong of an impression. That's enough.
Kreis, who had appeared from seemingly nowhere, joined the conversation.
That's true, but why does it seem like no one's looking for me?
It must be karma. Enkrid thought this but didn't say it out loud. There was no need to spoil the mood. Instead, he patted Rem on the shoulder.
Good work.
Rem smiled faintly. Ragnar, retrieving his broken sword, remarked,
I'll need to get a new sword.
He expressed his thoughts, as if he couldn't care less about the cheering around him. As the infantry, basking in brief celebration and victory, began to disperse, the Allied commander decided not to push the pursuit of the enemy. From now on, morale was in their favor. The situation had completely reversed. Which side would find the battlefield more uncomfortable tomorrow? Kreis considered the unfolding situation, thinking of possible variables.
Could there be something?
Surviving and gaining something required some calculations, and Kreis was doing just that. It wasn't too difficult. The enemy's intentions.
They used sorcery in the previous battle.
Wouldn't they try a similar trick?
Let's rest.
Enkrid spoke as they returned to their camp. It was indeed a time to rest.
Everyone is excused from guard duty and all other duties.
A messenger conveyed this message. Enkrid briefly wondered if the ferry commander would show up again, but that didn't happen. Would today's victory lead to tomorrow's victory? No one knew. Holding a favorable position didn't guarantee a win, so now they'd likely be holding strategic meetings to continue their success. Enkrid's guess was correct. Marcus was not reveling in the victory.
It seems like they might be up to something since they just retreated. Didn't they use some kind of sorcery before? Any signs of that?
None. They stood in a circle around a large table. A lieutenant responded to Marcus's question. Sorcery? They couldn't fall for the same trick twice. They had also hired a sorcerer on their side. She was an old woman from the homeland, and while she didn't have the ability to cast spells, she could sense if the enemy was trying something. That was enough. For Marcus, the world of sorcery was beyond his concern. All that mattered was if this information was true.
If they bring in asymmetrical forces from Aspen, the Red Cape Knights will support us immediately.
If the enemy deployed knights or wizards, they were prepared for that. Marcus nodded. He was a commander who felt the atmosphere of the battlefield with his skin. He used his head, but he was also sensitive to the mood.
I didn't want to go in.
It was as if the enemy, retreating as if to lure them in, had something sinister planned. Following them felt unsettling, as if a banshee had whispered in his ear. Thinking of a creature that freezes hearts with its wail indicated bad intuition. Marcus decided to end the battle there.
What are the losses for the border guard?
2 dead. Even the best soldiers could die if cut or pierced by arrows. Despite this, losing only 2 could be considered a good outcome. The border guard had killed dozens of enemy soldiers. The damage to the longbow unit was particularly devastating. It should have been a winning battle. Now the enemy had 2 options for a desperate attempt. One was to retreat, the other was to deploy asymmetrical forces. So, Marcus's task was to keep sending out scouts to gather intelligence on the enemy's movements. The next day there was no battle, and Marcus doubled the number of scouts, but they found nothing. The turtle was likely the nickname for the Naurilia heavy infantry, and the enemy was holding out like a turtle in its shell. They showed nothing, and encounters between scouts were rare. It seemed they were deliberately staying back within their fortifications. Was it an invitation to attack? The uneasy feeling persisted, making it hard for Marcus to speak decisively.
If we attack now, it's a complete victory. If they've set up something in their fort, we can just start with an arrow barrage and then move in with spearmen. We don't even need arrows. Surround the fort, set fire to a few tents, and poke them with spears. How about moving the border guard to block their retreat?
The lieutenants offered their opinions.
It feels off.
We'll wait.
Marcus decided to maintain their current position. It was a decision based on instinct. His intuition, which had saved him in many battles, told him the enemy still had something up their sleeve. The commander of Aspen observed the enemy's strength clearly. Naurilia's tactics remained the same.
Stirring up with the border guard.
Marcus's strategy was predictable. Concentrate his forces to turn the tide of the battlefield in one decisive strike. It worked. They were caught off guard in unexpected ways, reversing the momentum. So what? What does it matter? They had seen all the enemy had prepared. Now, how will they stop what I send? The commander cursed Norelia inwardly, feeling assured of victory. It was time for his battle to begin. It would start with killing that arrogant one, the so-called madman. The one who called him a fresh insult, Goal Head, the one wielding the axe. The knights had already proven that a small number of forces could change the course of a battle. So why must that small force be knights? The commander of Aspen, focusing on this idea, prepared his dagger, but it wouldn't end with just a dagger. His dagger would become a flail, smashing the entire battlefield. One day was enough for complete recovery. With no duties and a good meal, they had a day of rest. Enkrid had a short dream during the night, but quickly forgot it. A specter from the past had appeared, a mercenary who had shown him that skill and character do not always align. It wasn't a pleasant memory, so there was no need to dwell on it. In any case, the combination of Auden's divine abilities and the fairy-made medicine was a luxury he might not experience again.
It seems my medicine helped,
Auden remarked. Early in the morning, the fairy company commander had come by to talk. Enkrid was drenched in sweat, training. He was practicing the isolation technique. Auden had mentioned that it was now time to strengthen his joints. It felt like he was being made to do all sorts of things, but in the end it always proved beneficial, toughening his body and making him stronger. He was already proving that with his own body. Lying face down, he pressed his toes and palms into the ground, pushing his body up and down, bending and straightening his wrists. At first it seemed easy, but after a few repetitions, it became quite a challenge. It felt like his wrists were bearing a heavy weight. There was one gaze from the fairy watching with folded arms, another from a recently recovered, now lively panther, and a third gaze from a large sadistic brute watching with satisfaction. Right in front of the barracks, there was a mad barbarian squatting and watching. Then there was the creepy reddish brown-eyed person who kept scribbling something on the ground and erasing it repeatedly, lost in thought. Lastly, there was the lazy, genius swordsman who often got lost, waiting with a sword in hand.
Don't you have something to do?
Enkrid asked the company commander, finishing his morning training. The fairy, with green eyes fixed on Enkrid, spoke up.
No, I don't.
Then why are you still here? He conveyed with his eyes, but it didn't seem to have any effect.
Are we starting now?
Ragna, standing beside him, asked. He had won the order by lot, so Enkrid agreed to spar. He felt ready to fight again. His body could move without significant strain. Enkrid's gaze turned to Ragna. Ragna looked eager, like an impatient child. Why was he so keen on sparring? Enkrid didn't know, but it didn't matter. After all, had he ever known what to expect when dealing with these people? Enkrid gripped his sword. At first he held it with both hands, the blade pointed diagonally towards the sky. Another sword hung at his waist. Everyone noticed it but remained silent. Enkrid wanted to meet their expectations. A desire to impress them surged within him.